with the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and Amud Tefilah, the Pillars of Prayer, and we're going to learn entry Mem Hey and Avav, which is 45 and 46. So in these two entries, these two oisias, and also a little further on in Ayin Vav and Ayin Zayin, 76 and 77, the Baal Shem Tov speaks about a very profound, simple and yet very profound method of sweetening judgment. What that means exactly, we'll explain. And there's a type of judgment, a type of constriction, a type of limitation, and there's a process of sweetening it, and how judgments are sweetened. And in general, these teachings of the Baal Shem Tov reveal a very profound way of understanding text in general, and it almost anticipates or creates an opening to a certain type of understanding of where it's more a contemporary understanding of text, which is a type of redemption of text, that the reader is the one that gives life to the text. The text is written in a certain context of history, in a certain period of time. The words themselves are sort of dead on the page, and the reader, the author, is dead, so to speak, and the reader is the one that enlivens the text. And this is a very profound understanding that the Baal Shem Tov reveals, and we're going to talk about this idea. So he starts off, this is from Tzivos HaRivash, with a very simple question, and he doesn't address the question, but the question is whether a person should say davening, pray the prayers, should they do it with their eyes open or their eyes closed? So this is a question, and this is a discussion that's discussed amongst the poskim, amongst many of the codifiers. What is the right posture, not in terms of movement of the body, whether not to move or to move, but in terms of the eyes open or eyes closed? That generally the understanding is that maybe a preferred way of doing it would be to close your eyes, especially according to the Zohar that speaks about that the Shechina is considered a alumta shapir de lesbeina is a young maiden without eyes, which means it cannot see. And there's the idea of you're standing in the presence of the Shekhinah, to close your eyes, not to look at the Shekhinah, not to look at the Shekhinah, doesn't have eyes. So there's a more mystical reason to close your eyes. Maybe sometimes also closing your eyes could help in concentration, to help in focus. That's one way to think about it, that you should close your eyes. And Yatzim Einov, a person should close their eyes. There's such conversations, certainly in more Kabbalistic Svarim in general, about when a person practices any type of Yichudim, if they should close their eyes. Yud Abrital writes about this in Sulam Aliyah, and other sources speak about closing their eyes specifically. And other ones say, Dafka, specifically that we should keep our eyes open and look into the Siddur. And that's the right posture, how to keep your eyes open. That's the right positioning of the eyes, that your eyes should be open and looking into the Siddur. And classically, the way the Baal Shem Tov understands this, which is very much understanding of the various different states of consciousness that a person enters and exits, not only throughout their lifetime, but throughout the day itself, and even within the day itself, within every hour. So the Baal Shem Tov writes, and Tzivos HaRivash teaches, that it really depends on your state of consciousness and state of awareness, whether your eyes should be open or closed, which is a very strong principle in Torah Chassidus and the teachings of the Baal Shem, that they're in the way the Chayzer Lublin once wrote, is in Avodas Hashem, in the service of Hashem, in spiritual work, inner work, deeper work, there's no principles. And also this principle is not a principle, which means you always have to gauge yourself and see how are you feeling in this immediate moment, and accordingly you have to taper your spiritual practice. if you look at the description from some of the students of the Baal Shem Tov, where they speak about their master, how he davened, how he prayed, sometimes it says the Baal Shem Tov, some students say the Baal Shem Tov stood in one position and didn't even move a fingernail, and he was in a completely emotionless state of ecstatic unity, in a state of stillness, total stillness. And some students say that the Baal Shem Tov would dance and jump while he would davening, and certainly he would chuckle, he would move back and forth. And the answer is, which way did he daven? And the answer is, well, one student saw him on Monday, and one saw him on Tuesday, and one saw him on Monday morning, and one saw him on Tuesday morning, or Monday afternoon, or one saw him at the beginning of Shemoneh Esrei, the beginning of the meeting, and one saw him at the end, which means that it was a fluctuating state, and it depends on the state of the person that's praying. That's a very strong principle to gauge your awareness in this process. So the Baal Shem Tov says this: when a person is in a madrega katana, which means a person is in a constricted state. What does it mean that a person is in a constricted state? This is not just that you're feeling constricted and you're not feeling in a good mood, but constricted state, the way it shows up in the process of davening, the process of prayer, is that you cannot hold a concentration for a longer period of time, which means that you don't have klarkat, you don't have clarity, that your focus is not able to be attentive and intentional on the ideas that you're trying to pray about. So you can't hold your mind engaged in one particular thought for a longer period of time, and your mind is wandering in all different areas. That's the definition of katnus. That's the definition of katnus. Constriction comes from the word katua. Katnus comes from the word broken, which means that your consciousness is broken, which is sporadic. It's jumping from one thing to the next. It doesn't have the ability to stay focused for a longer period of time. So what is the solution? Says the Baal Shem, that the solution is then toiv yoisel ispalam teichasider. Then it's more appropriate that you should daven with your eyes open. You should pray with your eyes open, looking into the siddur. That Ima Sefi Yashem Achshavti Aro, which brought them also in the Gra, brings it down in the siddur, that with looking into the siddur, into the sefer, Yashem Achshavti Aro, you will not have distracting thoughts, machshavazaras, foreign thoughts, distracting thoughts. Shemekoyach sharoya oisius mispal yesber kavana, because from the power of seeing the letters, the fact that you're looking at the letters themselves allows you to pray with greater intention. So if you find your mind being distracted, so for example, you start davening, you start praying, and you want to say the Shemoneh Esrei, and you're trying to focus, and immediately your mind starts wandering in different things. What you can eat for lunch, or what you can have for breakfast, and who you have to meet today, and what you have to do. All different types of thoughts that usually are the thoughts that really, unfortunately, that's where really your cheshek, your desire really belongs there, and that's why your mind keeps on wandering to those areas. And you see that you can't hold focus onto the things that you want to concentrate now, which is the idea of the words that you're praying in, the words that you're davening. Says Baal Shem, you should look into the siddur. And what the idea of looking into the siddur is that you have a focal point. Your mind is going to be focused on the letters. We'll see soon that there's something much more profound, but this is a very simple way of understanding it. Your mind will be focused on the letters of the siddur, the letters on the page, and that is the way that you'll be able to hold your intention. And the reason for that is, besides the fact that it has a focal point, is because in your reading, you're constantly creating hischachas, new ideas. So let's say you're reading Baruch Atah Hashem, bless you, the source of all blessings. You are the source of our blessings. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. So when you say the word Baruch and you're looking at the word blessing and you're looking at the letters on the page, whether it's in Hebrew or even in English, or every language that you speak and you're reading it, so when your intention is focused onto the page, your intention can stay on the word Baruch for a few seconds, and then you move to the second word, which is Ata, which is you, and then it moves from that to the other thing. This is a basic, simple technique of allowing yourself to think through a thought process. The reason why we can't think about things and our mind wanders into other things is because sometimes when we try to think about something and we don't, we try to think about, let's say, think about the chair that's in front of you or the table that's in front of you. It's impossible. Within 3-4 seconds, maybe 7 seconds tops, your mind will wander into another area. Why? Because your mind constantly needs chachas, constantly needs renewal. So if you're going to focus, you can say, I'm just going to focus on the chair, there's nothing to focus on. So your mind will focus on for a few seconds on the chair and then wander to something else. But if you give your mind, in the language of the Gemara, Gemara uses in Kedushin, there's an idea of you're discussing one thing and it's similar to the same thing within a larger context, then your mind is able to jump from one thing to the next. So when you want to say you are the source of our blessing, Hashem Elokeinu, so you want to that's the phrase that you want to say. So every 3 seconds or 4 seconds you focus for a few seconds on Baruch. What does Baruch means? Blessed. Ata, what you means? Hashem, what does Hashem mean? Elokeinu was Elokeinu, and then you continuously do this. So it's me'inyan lini boisin, from one subject to other subject within the general subject, and then your mind can concentrate, and you'll find that if you do this deeply and correctly, slowly you enter into a more expansive state. What's the expansive state? The expansive state is that you'll be able to concentrate without actually having to look into the page, into the words. Says the Baal Shem, let's say, for example, a person that's starting off to daven, and it's the other way around. Avakushu dovek boil me'elyin. What happens if a person has dveikus, has unity, is cleaving to the higher worlds, the higher realms, which in the Torah is the Baal Shem, in the teachings of the Torah, the higher realms is not some type of cosmic outer body experience, but the higher realms means layers of clarity of consciousness of the unity of Hashem. So when a person has clarity, when a person has very muddied consciousness, and a person cannot think of thought more than a few seconds, that's because they're living in a very opaque state. That's the world of Asiya. That's the consciousness of Asiya in the mind. If a person has a more refined level of consciousness, a more subtle level of consciousness, then he goes into the world of Yitzira. Then the higher levels, the world of Bria, and then the highest level is the world of Atzilus. So what is Atzilus? What is Atzilus and Seichel? What is the level of Atzilus, of this Olam Elyon, the higher realms in the world of intellect and the world of intention, because that's what he's speaking about in the world of intention. What does that mean? It means klarkeit. It means clarity. So what happens if a person starts having Shemona Esrei? He starts not praying. He realizes that he's now in his very state of his mind is very clean, very clear, and he is able to focus, and he has a lot of clarity. Then the Baal Shem says, then it's better for him to close his eyes. Why is it better for him to close his eyes? Because then it's possible, if your eyes are going to be open, then the external vision of things that you're seeing on the outside, even if it's words on the page, will be a distraction of the clarity that you're experiencing internally. So again, what is the Baal Shem Tov saying? He's saying that really it depends on the level that you're davening in. If you're starting to daven in a state where you're in a constricted state, then start with looking at the letters and read the letters, and oisis machkimois, oisis ma'iras, the letters will shine, the letter will bring clarity, and slowly through the letters you'll attain a higher level of clarity, of consciousness, of expansive mind. If you start off davening and you feel that you're already there, then it's better to close your eyes. Okay, so that's the very simple teaching. Here the next one goes a little bit deeper in the same idea. I'll read the words and we'll just try to understand what he's saying. So this is already from the Toldos, from the student of the Baal Shem, where he's quoting the original also in the students of Baal Shem, but this is in the lens of the Toldos, through the lens of the Toldos. One of his primary students. Okay. If a person sees that he's in a state of constriction, and he cannot have attention. Again, that is the proof that he's in a state of constriction. If you want to know if you have constricted mind or expansive mind, is not how you're feeling at this moment, but if you can have intention or you cannot have intention. Could you focus or you cannot focus? If a person finds himself in a state of katnas and a person cannot have intention, Shem is gaber because he's constantly struggling with other foreign thoughts, which means he's trying to focus on the words, what the intention of the words mean, and he's trying to focus that he's that he's standing in front of the Shekhinah, and he's davening and he's praying. He's trying to focus on that, but his mind keeps on wandering on different things. So what should this person do? Azay yispalel kitinik ben yoima. this person should daven like a child. Ani mispal adas zatinik. This is the idea from Tzuras HaRivash, from Tzuras HaRivash. Ani mispal adas zatinik means there was a certain description when in the early states when Kabbalah started becoming revealed, and 1200, 1300s, late in the 1400s in Spain, there was a big conversation between the Mekalim and the Chokrim, between the philosophers and the Kabbalah and the Kabbalists. What's the right way to daven with what intention? Because it always has to be Elav Loim Ludoisav, it has to be your davening. The Sifra says you have to daven to Hashem and not to, God forbid, to the Midas, to the attributes. And sometimes it seems like there's a worshipping, God forbid, of the 10 spheres, that the Ovid Eser, possibly. So another way of saying is, Ani mispal das datinik. I'm going to pray like a child. What's a child? What's the child? A child, when he thinks about God, it's God. Very, very simply, without the sophistication of what that means. So he says, when you daven and you find yourself in a very constricted state, the first thing you should do is just try to not complicate your experience by trying to add different intentions, etc. But just to daven very, very simply. They once asked one of the great tzaddikim, there's a machlekes, there's an argument, when you say Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, in davening, the Mechaber, and also the writes in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Hey, that when you say Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, you have to have intention, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, which is Haya Haya V'Yeh, the infinite name of Hashem, the Shem HaForish, and also, since the Kri of this name, the way it's pronounced is Shem Aleph Dalet Nun Yud Adonai, therefore you also have the intention Hashem is Adonai Kol Haaretz, Hashem is the master of the universe. And the Gra says that you only have to mechaven, only have to have intention according to the Kri. So they once asked one of the tzaddikim, one of the Talmidim of the Magid, the Baal Shem, they asked him, what is the right way when you say Baruch Atah Hashem, what should you have in mind? And this could be a simple question, or whether we rule like the Mechaber, like the Beis Yosef, or we're going to say maybe like the Gra. And the answer was, Baruch Atah Hashem, when you say Hashem, think God. God means Hashem. Without the sophistication. I'm davening like a child. When I say Hashem, I mean Hashem. Don't ask me questions. Is the infinite one that's expressed itself in finitude, the unmanifest that comes into the manifestation? That's already a sophistication. When you're in a state of constriction, just think God. God. Baruch Atah Hashem, God. That's the first thing. Then the second important part is mitoich haksav. You should read what you're saying. So don't close your eyes and try to have intention. Try to say, I'm in a constricted state. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to try to have intention. But keep your eyes open and read the words. As it's brought down, my master, my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov once said, that the Baal Shem Tov said on himself, whatever level that is, whatever level the Holy Baal Shem Tov was on the state of Moichin de Katnos. This is the story when the Baal Shem was traveling to Eretz Yisrael. He was going to Israel to go to the Holy Land, and he was going with his daughter, Adel, and they came to Turkey. They came up until Turkey. And when the Baal Shem Tov was in Turkey, he experienced tremendous moichin de katnas, tremendous constriction of mind, whatever level that is, on the level on the Baal Shem Tov was. And he said he forgot everything. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't, certainly not his asagas, this higher level of vision, and not his level of faith and trust. He lost everything, all his inner clarity. And his daughter told him, Adel told him that they were going to recite, they're going to chant the words, the letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, just the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And through chanting the letters, the moichin of godless, the expansive mind, returned back to the Baal Shem. So this is, again, a person is a constricted mind on their own level, whatever that level is, and you're struggling with thoughts. So the Toldos writes from his teacher, from the Baal Shem, that what you should do, you should daven like mispal das datinik. You should daven like a child, very simply, not try to become very fancy and complicated and cerebral. That's very, very simple. And you should also read the letter slowly. And the Baal Shem says like this: Kisha mispala metoich haksav. when a person davens, prays through the letters, davik atzme ela oisius, and connects themselves with the letters themselves, azai mala b'chinas asiyah. Then he's elevating the level of asiyah, which is the furthest removed, the most constricted state. So by praying, by reading the words on the page, you're elevating the most constricted state. Then the Baal Shem Tov says like this: Kitevas ksav, the word ksav in Hebrew is chaf, taf, beis. The Baal Shem Tov does this various different times. You find this in the Talmud. We would do this at original Rosh Tevis. So the Baal Shem writes that the word that teaches that the word ksav is Rosh Tevis is an acronym for keser, the crown, shal malchus shehu taf, which is the malchus, which is the lowest level, the crown of the lowest level, the peak of the lowest level, shehu taf. Remember chaf taf, the keser of taf, which is 400. That somehow there's an elevation al yidei bina, through bina. And that's it. That's the end of the teaching. That and that's what Baal Shem Tov also told other people that they should do this. That ksav, the written word, is the keser, is the crown of the 400 that is sweetened through the beis, which is bina, which is intelligence, which is mind. What does this mean? So the first level to peel away, this is a very, very profound teaching, and there's multiple levels to understand this. The first thing that we have to understand is that ein adinin takim ela b'shar Shem, which is a principle that Ari brings down, that all judgments have to be sweetened in their source. Sweetened in the source means you have to go to the original place where judgments come about. What is judgment? Judgment is a constriction of light. There's a constriction of flow. There's a lack of movement and vitality and process. It's stagnant and it's stuck. That's the idea of a judgment. Literally, a person's experiencing judgment on themselves, a negative judgment, so they're feeling something constricted within them. But the root of the idea of judgment is the idea of constriction, and the shorish of judgment is in the world of bina. Let's focus on this, then we'll get to the 400 as well. What is bina? So bina in the spheres. So bina is the level of intelligence. The way that Arizal explains the shalshelas, the unfolding of worlds, the evolvement of worlds, of the inner worlds, the inner reality, is that in every realm there are 10 spheres. The higher three, Keser, Chachma, Bina, if you don't count Das, the higher three of each realm does not descend into the lower realm. That's mechusa, that's hidden. So let's say in the world of Atzilus, which let's say this world. Let's say there's a world A. World A has 10 spheres, starting from Keser going to Malchus, starting from the crown going to Malchus, which is royalty, receptivity, which is the vessel to receive. These 10, there's a shalshelas, there's a flow of light that's coming from one to the next. Obviously, this is conceptual, not literal. So it's flowing, the light is flowing from the Ein Sof, the infinite light, it's going to the 10 spheres in world number 1. Then in world number 2, which has to receive from world number 1, world B that receives from world A, world Bria that's receiving from the world of Atzilus, what it receives from is only from the lower 7. So the lower 7 of the top one enters now into the lower 10. And then the same thing will happen in the third world. The lower 7 of the second world will enter into the 10 of the third world. And the 3 always remain in their place. So what that would mean is that the 7 enfolds itself or vests itself within the lower realm of 10. So you start with the spheres, the lower 7, which is Chesed and Gevurah, Tiferes, etc. Right? So the higher realm of Chesed will go into Chachma, which is the first of the 10, and Gevurah, restriction, will go into the world of Bina, of the lower one. Let's explain this very simply, what that means. there are two types of intelligence. Very, very simply, very, very broadly speaking, there are two types of intelligence. And it could be also seen as the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain, or the chesed side of the brain and the gvura side of the brain. The expansive part of the brain or restrictive part of the brain. The right part of the brain is the conceptual part of the brain that sees with images, or the collective, the entirety of the idea. It's sort of a visual of the idea. It's like the intuition. A person has an idea, they want to create something. They see, let's say they want to create a home. That's the example that's used. They see the home in their mind, how they want to see it. It's a visual. It's a it's a seeing of it. There's no details yet. You just see the general scheme of what you want to create. Then what you do is that's the creative process. That's the right part of the brain. What the left part of the brain does is that it breaks it down into details, and it creates language. So now you can take your idea, your creative idea, and now explain the idea. So first you have a creative idea, a eureka moment, where you have this creativity, which is a flash of insight, like a vision of something that's in the right part of the brain. And then, which is a chachma part of you. And then the bina part of you, bina means to bane. Bina comes from the word in between, to break apart, to define. The bina part is where language is created. Bina Yisrael Meisha, this idea of bina is where language, and Tisha Kabim, the language is connected specifically to the world of bina, where you're breaking apart, or you're dissecting, analyzing, systemizing the ideas that you have in the creative part of your brain, the creative part of your mind, in a way that it can actually assimilate into many details. So bina is a type of gevura in its root. And it's the root of gevura, because bina is to take a flow of an idea or a creative idea that has no details and to make it into details. So details is a constriction of the idea, or even like this, even language where you're expressing idea, that even though language is an expression of your thoughts, it can never fully express your thoughts. That's why when a person speaks, they say that language is created to conceal man's thoughts. Of course, it reveals your thoughts, but simultaneously it's also concealing, because when you understand something deeply on a very creative place, and then you try to give it over to language through words, when the person's receiving it, in order for the person to receive it fully, you know that they're just saying the words, the person's not going to really understand it. You have to gesture, you have to give yourself into those words. And even then, sometimes you say something and you realize that the recipient of what you're saying doesn't really understand the same thing that you said, the way you understand it, even though you're saying it in words and you're putting the thought into the words, but the way the recipient, the observer, or the one that's hearing your words is listening to those words, you see that they're not really understanding the depth of what you're trying to convey. Because in words already there's a constriction. Okay, so bina is the hamtakas is the source of din in its source, is the sweetening of judgment in its source. In the Aleph Beis, let's get to this idea of tough. There's the Keser of Malchus of tough. What is tough? What is the 400s? So in the Aleph Beis, it starts with the letter Aleph, and then it goes until the letter Taf. Now, the Ramak asks a question: why is it that Aleph is the higher letter when it's only and the numbers actually have a number equivalent? So Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. For the first 10 letters is from 1 to 10. And the next 10 letters is 10 to 100, and then 100, 200, 300, 400. And the final 22nd letter of the Torah, of the Aleph Beis, is Taf, which is 400. That's the fullness of the letters. So the question is, why is the first letter 1, which seems to be a higher letter, and the last letter, Taf, is 400? If Aleph is higher, it should be more. That's the question. What's the answer? What's the depth of the answer? The answer is that everything originates from the Or Ein Sof, an infinite light. Infinity is not quantified, not contextualized, cannot even be defined as 1. And then the oneness, or the infinity of the Ein Sof, of the infinite light, uses the tools, the vessels, which are the language, the Aleph Beis. Again, this is very much what the Baal Shem has been teaching throughout the entire text over here, that it's the language that is the medium of creation. Hashem created the world through language. Hashem said, let there be light. Hashem said, let there be, and it became. That language is the medium through which creation comes about, which means that everything originates from the Or Ein Sof, from the infinite light. This infinite light then uses the 22 vessels, and the first vessel that it's expressed in is the least number, because the least number, which is number 1, represents something that is the closest to infinity. The more infinity becomes vested into the world of multiplicity and the many, that's further, the further it is removed from its original inception of being infinite. So Taf being 400 is not showing on its magnitude of greatness, but it's showing on its limitation of finitude, that it has already 400. So 400 is one that's reflected, the infinite that's reflected into so many different multiplicities that it becomes 400. That's why the world of Tayu, the world of chaos, is connected to 400, and Esav comes to gather to go to Yaakov with 400 men, and 400 is Einar, etc. There's many ideas that are connected to 400 because of that. This is a teaching from the Baal Shem that the Degel brings down, which is also found in the Mein HaChachma, in the early Mukabbalim that write this, that Taf 400 is actually 400 alephes. That means 400 is not 400 times 1. It's 1 that is multiplied into 400s. When you look at the Taf, at the 400, it's really 400 alephs. It's the aleph that became multiplied into the base, which is 2. Then the 2 became multiplied into 3, and it goes and it's reduced and reduced and reduced. The light is reduced until it comes to 400. So 400 is the furthest thing removed from the aleph, which is essentially the first thing that's removed from the infinite light. So that's why 400 represents the deepest. The larger number, the largest of the numbers, represents the furthest. Again, nothing is really further and closer, but the way we're perceiving it in our own consciousness, the furthest from the Ein Sof, the furthest from the infinite light. This is why also the Kedushas Levi writes something very wonderful. There's a very big discussion amongst a lot of the Mekubbalim why the letters of the name of Hashem, the Shem HaMefarish, the name, the Tetragrammaton, the Shem HaMefarish, is a Yud and a Hey and a Vav. Why those particular letters were chosen. And there are various different ways how to understand this. It has to do with its graphic design, after the pronunciation of the letters, etc. But the Kedushas Levi, the Raditchva writes, because the Yud and the Hey and the Vav, when they're filled out and they're written out, have the least numerical value. So for example, if you take the letter Aleph, Aleph Lamed Pei, Aleph Lamed Pei is 111. Which is a large number. Beis, if you write out the letter Beis Yud Taf, that is 412. Or Daled is 434. So every letter you fill out has a very large number. And some larger than the other. The minimal, the smallest number letters in the Aleph Beis, when they're written out, is the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav. The Yud is Yud Vav Daled, which is 20. The Hey is either Hey Yud or Hey Aleph or Hey Hey, but either way, either it's 6 or it's 10 or it's 15, but it's a small number. And the Vav also could be Vav Aleph Vav. This will be 13, or Vav Vav, which is 12. Which is, they're going to be a very small number in comparison to the other numbers. Right? All the letters are when they're filled out, have a very large number. So what's the reason why these Yud-Kei Vav-Kei are the containers that hold the infinite light, stronger than other letters in the Aleph Beis? Because these are the letters that have the least numerical expression. So what's less in number is actually higher in spirit, higher in its connection to something that's infinite. So Taf is the lowest. So what does the Baal Shem say? Ki Tevis Ksav, the word Ksav, is the keser, is the crown, the written letters, written words on the page, is the crown of the 400, which is the ultimate place of din, of constriction, as expressed in letters, which becomes sweetened through bina, through understanding. What does that mean? What is those words? So I know this is the skeleton of there, but what does it actually mean? A little further on, again, this is not in order, but this is the way it's created here, is that in Ois Ayin Vav, the Toldos brings down a teaching from the Baal Shem again. Shamati Memori. The Baal Shem says that when a person prays or learns and understands what they're reading, Azai Mekasher Malchus Shu Dibur, then you're connecting Malchus, which is the final container of everything, which is speech, to Bina, which is, Bina is Machshava, thought. Let's read another teaching from the Baal Shem. The next one, Ayin Zayin. Shoyesh HaTefilah, the source of davening, Lekasher Din HaMalchus, to connect the judgment of the constriction of Malchus. Remember, why is a person davening? Certainly if it's a person's davening, Minatoyer according to the Ramban, a person's davening because there's a lack, there's a chesed, there's something that's absence, there's a din, there's a judgment. Rifa'inu Hashem means heal us, which means we're not healed. Redeem us because we're not redeemed. Forgive us because we don't feel forgiven. So there's a state of lack in the universe. There's a state of constriction in the universe. The Shekhinah is not fully present in this world. There's no redemption of the Shekhinah, which means that the world will be in its perfected state. We will be in our perfected state. So what you're doing in Tefilah is lamatek adina b'shasha bina, which is to sweeten the judgments through bina. Now, who are we talking about? We're not only talking about a person that's davening, praying, and they're feeling lack in their thing that they're praying for, but we're talking about, like I said before, we're talking about a person that's davening and is in a state, not only are they lacking what they need in their lives, whether it's physically or spiritually or mentally, emotionally, whatever they're missing in their lives, that there's something not flowing correctly in their lives, but they're also in their state of consciousness, they can't focus. There's another din, there's a double din, there's a judgment of what they're experiencing, the lack that they're experiencing. There's a judgment that they can't even hold a thought for a longer period of time, that they're not experiencing clarity and clarity. So what is the idea of davening, especially when you're reading the letters? And this is a tremendously profound understanding for the Baal Shem, that, like we mentioned before, that anticipated the whole deconstruction of this movement and really initiated it on a metaphysical level, is that through the process of reading with understanding, which the Baal Shem calls bina or machshava, a person creates a tikkun. Let's explain how this works like this. In Sefer Yetzirah, in the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah, which is all about letters, it says that the world is created b'sefer, with an author, with a book, and with a story. That's one version. Another version is b'sefer, with a book and a story. What is the book and the book? These are the two books that it talks about on Rosh Hashanah, the book of heaven. What is the book and the book? The difference between a book and a story is that one is verbal and one is printed or written. When a person communicates through language and speaks to somebody, if you're having a dialogue with another person, this is a seeper, you're telling over the other person the story. You're the giver of the story, the other person is the recipient of the story. And this is the way the Gra explains this piece of Sefer Yetzirah. When a person is speaking a story to somebody, there's immediate revelation of your thought to the person that's listening. So long as the person is an intelligent person, and you're telling them an intelligent thought, there's immediate revelation from the speaker to the listener. But that doesn't work the same way with a book. The book is, this is the way it works with a book. The book is, a person writes a book, prints a book, however there is. A person writes this book. The person has these thoughts, gives it over into the page, and writes it down on the page. Then it's printed or copied. When the reader picks up the book, before they read the book is inanimate. The book is concealed. Or to say it a little differently, the book has judgment and the book is actually dead. Which means it's not a live text. It only becomes alive through the reading of the text. When the reader reads this book, the lines on the page, the reader animates the text. So there was an animation from the original author that was animated and live. And they expressed their thoughts onto the page. Then it became dead on the page, and then becomes reawakened or relived by the reader that reads it now from the deadness of that page. So before the page is being written, this is even a halachic definition. It doesn't have kedusha necessarily. If you print something and it's not read, it doesn't have necessarily kedusha. It doesn't have necessarily sanctity. Why? Because before it's read, it doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning to it. Okay, that's another word, a better word for that. It's not alive, meaning there's no meaning. So you have meaning in your mind, you write it on the page. Now on the page, it's dead, it's din, it's constricted. And then by person reading it, they're re-alivening it or rereading it in their own consciousness and their own way of understanding it, and they're giving the words animation and meaning. Let's go this a little further, a little deeper what the Baal Shem is saying. There's ksav, there's the written word, and then there's the read word. The Baal Shem is saying that if a person experiences katnas, a person is in a state of constriction, both because they are lacking in their lives, and also because they're in a state of, their mind is in a state of constriction, because they can't have a clear thought. So what's the solution that the Baal Shem offers? He says you should read. You should read Mitach HaKsav. You should read the words of the prayer, the words of davening, the words of Torah, or the words of Tillim for that matter. You should read it from the page. Because what are you doing? Notice something. When a person writes, when you want to write the Aleph Beis, let's say you want to write the letter Aleph. The way you actually write the letter Aleph, the way a person writes the letter, even if it's script or not script, just a regular colloquial way of writing, you start from the left of the letter and you move towards the right. So if you want to write an Aleph, you put your pen to the left side and then you move towards the right. You want to write a Beis, you start from Beis and Gimel, you start from the left, you move to the right. Dalet, you start from the left, you move to the right. That's the way written letters are written, from left to right. Which means on a very deep level, remember we spoke about the left and the right, the two sides? Left is Gevura, which means that letters are Gevura, which means a letter doesn't convey a message, or else it's a symbol for something, and you know what it's a symbol for. But if you don't know what it's a symbol for, and you just read a letter on its own is a constriction. If you see random, or not random, but if you see letters in sequence, and you don't remember a letter before, but if let's say a person places in front of you a shin, a lam, and a vav, and a mem, which spells the word shalom. But you see the shin, and it flashes, and then it disappears. Then a lam, and it disappears. Then a vav, and it disappears. And a mem disappears. And you don't remember the first letter. Then all you will have is just letters, which means there's no meaning yet. You'll say, maybe I remember a mem, maybe I remember a vav. I'm not really sure. But if you don't remember the whole sequence of the letters, which is a word, all you see is constriction. All you're perceiving is constriction. When you're writing on the page, if you look at a page that's written, even though it's created into words, if you don't know how to read these words, let's say it's a language that you're not familiar with. You see letters on a page, and you're not familiar with the words, what these words mean, what these letters mean, and what the shape represents, and you don't understand how to read this. All you see is a constriction, which means you don't see anything. You see no meaning and no purpose and no light. It's constricted for you. So it's an unread letter, and it's impossible for you to read it, and all you see is judgment. So the world of letters is din, is judgment. The world of reading is the opening up of judgment to meaning. You have something that's constricted. Let's say you have a letter that's unread, and you can't read this language. It's constricted, means it's concealed from you. Then you give it to another friend of yours who knows how to read this language, and they read it for you, and they explain to you what the letter means. Now these letters on the page mean something. They become alive. They become unconstricted. There's an amtakas hadin, there's a sweetening of the judgment. The judgment was that it was concealed from you. But by the act of reading, you're actually giving it meaning and it becomes alive. And that's why the way to read letters, even though you write letters from left to right, the way you read Aleph Beis is from right to left. The reading of the letters from right to left means that you're enlivening, you're doing chesed, you're opening up the letters that have no meaning, but now they come, when they're streamed together, the letters become words, and the words, you understand it with your bina. There's Amtakas Adin, the sweetening of judgment. Again, if you don't know how to read, and you give it to someone to read for you, and maybe that person knows how to read but doesn't understand what it means, there's still not a full Amtakas Adin. Maybe now you have the sound of the words, but the sounds don't tell you anything yet. Maybe there's a certain way the sounds of the words give you some intimation of what these words might mean. Maybe it's familiar to another language. But until you if you don't read the words with bina, with an understanding of what those words mean, then the words become a little bit enlivened because now they have like a tnu, they have a movement. Before the letters on the page on their own, without being read, are completely dead and inanimate. You read them. This is why the Tikkun Zohar brings down that nekudas, vowels, are the ruach, are the spirit that moves letters. Because the letters on their own are dead. The moment you give wind to them, which means a vibration, a sound, they start becoming alive. So the letters now, instead of being dead letters on a page, all of a sudden it says, Baruch Atah Hashem. You don't know what it means, but it's still a little bit alive. Now if you had intention and you knew simple kavanah, the spala das atinik, like a child, you knew that Baruch means bless and Ata means you and Hashem means Hashem. Once you have that meaning of what those words mean, then what you actually experience this now is a full hamtakas hadin, a full sweetening of the judgment of the constriction that was right in front of you. Says the Baal Shem, that if a person is experiencing constriction, a person's constriction of his mind and experiencing constriction in general, what should this person do? Read the Siddur, read a book of Tehillim. What are you doing in the act of reading? You're doing a sweetening, you're doing a hamtakas hadin, you're taking letters on the page that are meaningless, have no light, no animation, without you, the participant, the reader, reading this text, getting engaged in the text. Without it, it's completely inanimate. You're animating the text through the sound and mainly through the bina, the understanding of what these words mean, and you're experiencing an opening up of this judgment into something that's sweet. Well, now all of a sudden these words mean something and it's meaningful to you. Says the Baal Shem, when a person does that, there's an immediate symbiotic or reciprocated relationship that when you're performing hamtakas hadin, a sweetening of the judgment, that you're performing in the text itself, that automatically expands your own consciousness and moves you from a state of constricted mind to expansive mind, from a state of katnus to a state of godless, from a state of inanimation to a state of animation. And that will affect your entire life. So all the things that you felt that are in judgment and are constriction and concealments, I don't understand why this is happening to me. Why am I going through this experience? And this feels like it's just pulling me down. It's a constriction. I don't see the light. I don't see the meaning. I don't see the purpose of these things. The more a person, and you're really feeling this in a state of katnus, you're really feeling constricted. So the Baal Shem's solution to this is say a kapitel Tehillim, say a chapter of Psalms, read davening with kavanah of like a child, because this act itself is an hamtakas hadin, and that automatically affects you. That you have an expansiveness, and everything opens up, and you experience hamtakas hadin. And this is a chiddush of the Baal Shem on many, many, many different levels. This is a novel idea from the Baal Shem on many different levels. First of all, a very subtle way of how he reads and understands what it means to read, what it means to see things on a page before it's read, and what reading does, and that it's the klippa, it's the highest level of keser, of malchus, our letters in themselves, and through bina, there's the sweetening of it, but it's also something very wonderful and powerful, where other tzaddikim, certainly Dari speaks about hamtakas hadin, to sweetening judgment, and it's a lot of different kavanas and yichudim, and a person has to meditate and have high levels of intention in order to create sweetening of judgments. You have to look at the name and find a certain thing within the names. There's a whole process, or you do your pirurim, bebirurim. There's a whole different, many of the Kabbalim speak about all different types of technical and very evolved yichudim and meditations and inner practices for a person to do hamtakas hadin. The Baal Shem Tov says, you want to do hamtakas hadin? Pick up a Tehillim. Just pick up a book of Psalms and say Tehillim. And that's the pashtus, and the simplicity and the profoundness of the teachings of the Baal Shem. We should have a wonderful week, and we should be mamtik all the din in our lives, sweeten all the judgments.